Hi, it's Sarah, the Tudor travel guide here, and welcome to Cowdray House in West Sussex. It's a place enshrouded with myth and legend. A legend which tells why this once great Tudor house now lies in ruins. Stick around and I'll tell you the story. So there has been a house on this site through the medieval period, but our Tudor story, begins around the 1520s. Up until that point, Cowdray House was owned by Sir David or Davy Owen, who, by the way, was the uncle to Henry VII. Enter William Fitz. Now, William had grown up alongside Henry VIII in the schoolroom. He'd in fact been Henry VIII's whipping boy, which meant that if the little prince got into trouble, it was William who took the brunt of the punishment. But this meant that, with the two boys growing up alongside each other, that deep roots of friendship took hold. And of course, once Henry became Henry VIII, Sir William also began to amass titles and wealth. And so we reached the 1520s when Sir William was granted lands in this area, and he was looking for a fine country home that would sit alongside his newfound status at the Tudor court. As I've mentioned, at the time, Cowdray House was owned by Sir Davy Owen. And cheekily, his son sold the property to Sir William right from under his father's nose. Goodness knows what kind of discussions were held around the dining table as a result of that. In 1528, Sir William finally acquired the property, although Sir Davy continued to have a lifetime interest in the property and lived here at Cowdray until his death a few years later. Now, he had begun to convert the medieval house that had existed on the site into a new and fine Renaissance home. After Sir David's death, Sir William picked the building programme up here with gusto, and he continued to build and complete the privy range that you can see behind me. The building was entered by the West Range in a magnificent gatehouse with two symmetrical octagonal towers which form a striking facade. Once within the courtyard, you would have seen a beautiful stone and marble fountain, and beyond that, in the East Range, the privy lodgings. So what most strikes you when you enter the courtyard here at Cowdray is the magnificent range of windows which would have allowed light to stream into the Great Hall and into the privy lodgings. The Great Hall, which was truly magnificent in its time, was entered by this porch that you can see behind me. And in fact, this was constructed by William Fitzwilliam on the anniversary and to commemorate the birth of Prince Edward, of course Henry VIII's son and heir. And in fact today you can just see the rather eroded remains of Henry VIII's coat of arms, and in fact that is only one of two in the country, the other being at Hampton Court Palace. And while we're talking about Hampton Court Palace, if you're lucky enough to get inside that porch and look up to the ceiling, you will see a beautiful vaulted ceiling with delicately carved stonework full of symbols and heraldry, not only of Sir William, but also of his lord and master, Henry VIII. Thankfully, over the centuries, there were many visitors to Cowdray, and they recorded both in words and in pictures the glory of the building at its heyday. And so, for example, we know the Great Hall was one of the finest of its type. In fact, it was called Buck Hall on account of the fact that there were 12 life-size bucks carved and situated around the interior of the hall. And one of those bucks had around its neck the bow and arrows used by Elizabeth I when she came here to Cowdray. Now, speaking of Tudor royalty, 3 Tudor monarchs came and visited Cowdray. Henry VIII came on a number of occasions, Edward VI on one occasion, and Elizabeth herself on 2 occasions. And typical of any great house of its day, whenever the king and or queen visited, the lord and lady would ship out the household to allow the royal household to take over. And we know for sure that when the likes of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I visited Cowdray, they would have stayed over here in the northeast tower, where the most privy and high status rooms were located. And in fact, here at Cowdray, there were a set of rooms in that tower that were reserved solely for the use of the king or the queen. Now that's quite unusual. Most often we would find that the most high status lodgings in any manor house or castle would be ceded to the king or queen, but otherwise lived in by the lord of the manor, whoever that may be. But not the case here at Cowdray, and that is quite unusual. Now, before we go on any further, I think I should say one or two things about William Fitzwilliam. He's not one of my favourite Tudor characters. Why, you may be asking? Well, of course, he was in the thick of it during the downfall of Anne Boleyn, and he was just one of the three men, alongside Anne Boleyn's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and Sir William Paulet, to pitch up at Greenwich after Anne had been arrested and interrogate her. And in fact, Anne herself would later say that there was only one person amongst the three that had treated her with any dignity, and that was Sir William Paulet. William Fitzwilliam, it seems, was keen to do the king's bidding. And although the Boleyns, of course, fell and Anne was executed, just the following year, Sir William was rewarded by becoming ennobled as the first Earl of Southampton. However, the new Lord Southampton didn't have too long to enjoy his fine home here at Cowdray, for he died in 1542 without an heir, and thus Cowdray House passed to his nearest and dearest, and that was his half-brother, Sir Anthony Browne, who, by the way, was also in the thick of Anne Boleyn's downfall. So Sir Anthony finished the building work that had been commenced by William Fitzwilliam, and he was responsible for finessing some of the building. For example, he built a fine Louvre which sat atop of the Great Hall and was adorned with golden weather vanes. Now, that's completely gone. We can't see that today. But Sir Anthony continued to live a fine life here at Cowdray. But what then happened to this house? Why today does it lie in ruins? Well, my friends, for that we have to go back to that myth and legend, which is known as the Curse of Cowdery. And in fact, it is all wrapped up in the history of Sir Anthony Browne. Now, Sir Anthony inherited a number of different properties as a result of the dissolution of the monasteries. And he is said to have been holding a feast at one of his properties nearby Battle, also in Sussex, when a monk from one of the dissolved monasteries charged into the hall and went up to Sir Anthony, and he cursed him, saying that his family and his property and his houses would be destroyed by a curse of fire and water. Well, who knows if Sir Anthony paid heed to that, or indeed if it did happen. However, on the evening of the 24th of September 1793, sparks from a brazier caught alight in the northwest part of the tower. Soon the house caught ablaze, and of course with only 2 people in attendance, they were unable to put out the fire despite desperate efforts. Now, one of the tragedies of this story is at the time the house was being redecorated and prepared for a wedding in the family. And as a result, many of the precious paintings and artefacts had been taken from various parts of the house and stored in the North Gallery, adjacent to the Northwest Tower. Now, I am assured, my friends, that there is a particular wind that drives from the north to the south. And this meant that when the gallery and the tower caught fire, not only did it spread quickly in that part of the building, it actually transferred the fire over to the southern part of the house. And so today, that is why we have quite substantial ruins on the entrance on the west side and also on the east on the privy lodgings, but we've almost entirely lost both the north and the south ranges. It is a sad thing indeed to consider what was lost that night. Many paintings, perhaps even including some Holbeins, for Holbein himself did stay at Cowdray for a period of about 1 month, and I personally think he must have painted some of the family during that time. That, my friends, is conjecture on my part. But nevertheless, we do know that many priceless objects of art and paintings was lost that night. And thus the house was destroyed by fire, and so one part of the curse was fulfilled. But what about water, I hear you say? Well, just 2 days after this house burnt to the ground, the 8th Viscount Montague, who owned Cowdray at the time, was away, in fact enjoying himself in Germany. But he died, drowned in a boating accident trying to shoot the rapids on the Rhine Fall. And thus, of course, we see that the curse of Cowdray, the curse of fire and water, which was laid upon this house by that monk way back in the 16th century, finally was fulfilled. Well, what do you think? Was it just a coincidence, or was the curse real? I'll leave you to decide.